Okay, we're starting from the Mishnah, DAF Ayin Vav Amud Aleph. Mati said we got to the Mishnah yesterday. So the previous Mishnah told us that anything which is fit for storage, normal to store, that means used by humans, most likely we're going to be speaking about food. So then, if you carry it in the right quantities, in the normal quantities that you store, then you're chayiv for carrying on Shabbos. Otherwise, you wouldn't be chayiv. So this Mishnah now goes into the details of what are the quantities that we're talking about. So the Mishnah says, Hamaitzi teven, if somebody transfers straw. So this kind of straw, Rashi explains, is talking about like processed straw. So it's like crushed. The stalks are not whole. And Kimale pi para. So if you take out straw, the quantity, the amount that can fill up the mouth of a cow. So this is typically cow food. Or eitza Kimale pi gamo. If somebody transfers from one rishus to another rishus. Whenever we say carry, we're talking about from one rishus, from a private domain to a public domain, or the opposite, or 4 amos in a public domain. So if he takes out eitza Kimale pi gamo, eitza, we'll see in the Gemara what it is. It's another kind of fodder, another kind of animal food. Eitza, if he takes out Kimale pi gamo, the amount to fill the mouth of a camel. So that again is typically camel food. Or amir. Amir is another kind of straw. This kind of straw, Rashi explains, is kashin shel shibalin, means the stalks. So it's whole stalks. They explain it's a little softer. It's usually bundled. This is normally fed to a lamb. So if somebody carries out amir kamale pi tle, amir, this kind of straw, the amount to fill the mouth of a lamb. Or asavim, grass, kamale pi gedi, grass, the amount to fill the mouth of a goat. Or ale shum v'ale bitzalim, leaves of garlic or leaves of onions. Lachim, when they're fresh and moist. Then the shear is the size kigregeres, is like a dried fig. Yeveshim, but if the leaves, the garlic or onion leaves, are dried out, then it's no longer fit for human consumption, which would be a gregeres, the size of a fig. Like we'll see as we go through the Gemara, that whenever it comes to human consumption, food for humans, the size is always a gregeres, the size of a fig. But if it's yeveshim, these leaves are dried out, then it's no longer fit for human. Rather, we measure it by the size that can fill the mouth of a goat. Kamale pi gedi. Ve'ein mitztarfin ze im ze mipnei shaloi shavu b'shiurehen. One item cannot join with another item to fill their size. So, for example, in our Mishnah we discussed different kinds of straws for different kinds of animals. So you can't mix cow food and camel food to get the size. Let's say if you need to have, we said, to fill the mouth of a cow, you can't mix cow food and camel food to get if you don't have enough of one to fill up the whole size to be chayiv on Shabbos. In other words, you wouldn't be chayiv if you have some of one and some of the other. So just to explain here, Rashi explains the different sizes. As we're going through the Mishnah here, we said the pi para, what can fill the mouth of a cow, is not as big as what can fill the mouth of a camel. A camel eats more. So the first thing in the Mishnah we said teven, like the amount that can fill the mouth of a cow, is not as much as this eitza, which we'll see in the Gemara, is bean straw. That's more to fill the mouth of a camel. And amir and asavim are also, I don't remember which one is more. I think the one for the lamb is more than the one for the goat, yeah. Okay, so let's see the Gemara. So the Gemara says, my eitza. What is this eitza that we're talking about? That's camel food. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, teven shalmine kitnius. This is straw of lentils, of different kind of beans or lentils. We'll see soon that it's lentils rather than beans. Okay, that's what it is. That's what eitza is. Camel food, which is bean straw. Ki asa Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came to Bavel from Eretz Yisrael, Amar, he said, Hamaitzi teven kimale pi para. Let's say, so the Mishnah told us that teven is normally fed to cows. So if you bring out the amount that can fill the cow's mouth, that's considered carrying on Shabbos, because you have a use for it. Let's say you carry teven, which is straw, the one that's usually fed to cows. Kimale pi para, the amount that could fill a cow's mouth, but you carried it out legamo. Your intention was to feed it to a camel.
But it's more than the cows.
So the camel usually eats more than the cow. So you don't have enough to fulfill what you want to do. That's
but it's more than if he had in mind a cow, he's chuyuv, and if he had in mind a camel, he's not. It's the same amount.
No, so let's see. Let's see the Gemara. So we already know from Rashi we have a good idea of where we're going to go with this Gemara, because we said that the normal amount of straw is for a cow, so you would be chayiv. But the Gemara wants to know now. So we're getting there. The Gemara says, if your intention was to feed a camel, but you carried out enough for a cow. But your intention was to feed a camel. What's the halacha? Rabbi Yochanan Amar chayiv. Rabbi Yochanan says you're chayiv. So that would seem like the same way we explained the Mishnah till now, because since that's a normal amount and it has a normal use, even though your intention is not to feed the cow right now, you still would be chayiv. Rav Shimon ben Lakish Amar, Rish Lakish says, pater, you're pater. And we'll see in a minute. Well, we'll assume right now that the reason why Rish Lakish says pater is because your intention is to feed the camel, and you don't have enough to feed the camel, so you would be pater from carrying.
Are you sure about the sizes? Because it seems like the Mishnah was going in descending order of size of animal.
Rashi clearly says by Kemale pi gamol, nafish shiura mi pi para. It's more than the...
Which is odd compared to the rest of the...
Yeah, we first compare cow to camel, and then we go on to lamb and goat, which is less. Yeah. It's the next two, we compare the next two. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan says you're chayiv if your intention was to feed the camel and you brought out enough just to feed the cow, and it's cow food. Rabbi Yochanan says chayiv. Rish Lakish says pater. Now what happened is Rabbi Yochanan retracts. The Urta Amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi. At night, Rabbi Yochanan, I guess, gave the class, and that's what he said. Rabbi Yochanan said that you're chayiv for carrying, for transferring on Shabbos. Litzafra in the morning, hadarbe. In the morning he retracted. So now I guess he said you're pater. He agreed with Rish Lakish. Amar Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef says Shapir Avad Dehadar. It's proper. It's a good thing that Rabbi Yochanan retracted and changed his psak, changed the halacha. Why? The haloi chazi lagamo. Because he's thinking logically like Rish Lakish. If you are bringing out the food to feed a camel and you don't have enough for the camel, so then the way he understood the Mishnah, you shouldn't be chayiv because you're carrying something which doesn't have a use. Amar le Abaye. Abaye says to Rabbi Yosef, Adarabba. On the contrary, it should be the opposite. The opposite of what you're saying. Kidemei kara mistavra. The way Rabbi Yochanan said it originally at night, when he said chayiv, that's the way that seems to be the correct way. Why? The chazi lapara. Because it is fit for a cow's consumption, for feeding a cow. And the way we understood the Mishnah, the way we still understand the Mishnah, is that if you take out cow food, you need the amount to feed a cow. So even though your intention is to feed the camel, it's cow food, and you measure it by what can fill the mouth of a cow. That's what Abaye says. So Abaye agrees with the first way Rabbi Yochanan taught, which is chayiv. Ella, so the Gemara presents it differently. The Gemara presents the machlokes between Rav Yochanan and Rish Lakish differently. Ki asa Ravin. When Ravin came to Bavel from Eretz Yisrael, Amar, he said like this: Hamaitzi teven kimale pi para ligamo. If somebody carries out teven, straw, which is cow food, kimale pi para, the amount that can fill the mouth of a cow, ligamo, but he took it out to feed a camel, dekuli alma, where in this case everybody would agree. Loi pligi, they wouldn't argue the chayiv, they would all agree that you're chayiv. Like we explained in Rabbi Yochanan before, because it's cow food, so we measure it by the cow. What can fill the mouth of a cow? Ki pligi, where do they argue? Where is the machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish? B'maitzi eitza kimale pi para lapara. When you carry out eitza, which we said is bean straw, which is camel food, but your intention is to feed the cow. So you have enough to fill the mouth of a cow of camel food. But we said in the Mishnah that in order to be chayiv, in order to be held responsible for carrying camel food on Shabbos, you have to have enough to fill the camel's mouth. But here you only have enough to fill the cow's mouth, because your intention is to feed the cow. So what's the halacha here? The ipcha itmar. We were taught the opposite of the way it was presented before. Here, Rabbi Yochanan says pater. Rabbi Yochanan amar pater. Rish Lakish amar chayiv. Rabbi Yochanan says pater. Again, the way we're explaining the Mishnah the whole time is because each food goes by who it's meant for. Cow food, you need the amount to fill a cow's mouth. Camel food, you need the amount to fill a camel's mouth, even though you're doing something different with it. Like in this case, you're taking out camel food to feed the cow. So the Gemara explains. Rabbi Yochanan amar pater. Rabbi Yochanan that says you would be pater here because you don't have the right amount the way the Mishnah said it. Achila al yedei hadchak lo yishmei achila. His explanation is that achila al yedei hadchak, eating out of dire necessity. In other words, you have a cow here, but you're feeding it camel food, so obviously you don't have another choice. The cow's hungry and you don't have anything else to feed it. So he says that's not considered eating. So if you feed a cow camel food, that's not considered eating. So when you carry out the amount of camel food to fill a cow's mouth, again, according to that logic, you'll be pater. Rish Lakish Amar, Rish Lakish says chayiv. Why? Achila al yedei hadchak shmo achila. Even though it's like forced eating, it's not the normal way to feed a cow camel's food, you'll still be chayiv because it's still considered to be eating. So if you take out enough camel food to feed a cow, you're chayiv. Okay. So the Mishnah continued and said, Amir was the kind of straw which was less processed, which was normal to be fed to a lamb. Amir kimale pitle, the amount to fill the mouth of a lamb. The Mishnah says, Sofrek the Gemara asks, V'hotanya kivgroigeres. We learned in a brayso in a different place, the amount of this kind of straw is the amount of a fig, a dried fig. Not the amount to fill the mouth. Well, we assume that means that it's not the amount to fill the mouth of a lamb. The Gemara answers, Idi v'idi chad shiyurahu. They're both the same. The amount of a dried fig is the same amount to fill a lamb's mouth. So it's the same thing. Okay. Then the Mishnah went on to say, Alei shum v'alei betzalim, leaves of garlic and leaves of onion, lachim, when they're fresh and moist, kigregeres, then it becomes human food. People can eat that. So therefore, the shear, the amount, the size that you're chayiv for, you're liable for carrying on Shabbos is kigregeres, the size of a fig. V'yaveshim, and when these leaves are dried out, kemale pihagvi, it's only fit for feeding a goat, and it's the amount that could fill the mouth of a goat. Then the Mishnah added another thing, so this is what the Gemara is going to focus on. One item of food of this fodder can't be joined with another to complete the size, so that you should be chayiv on Shabbos. Amar Rabbi Yossi clarifies here. Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina says, Ein mitzdarfin l'chamor shebehen, avo mitzdarfin l'kal shebehen. So when we say it doesn't join, one doesn't join the other, the way Rashi explains this is that as the Mishnah goes on, the bigger shear that's given is considered the more lenient. So, cow food, you're chayiv if you bring out the amount that could fill a cow. So let's say that's whatever size that is. The camel food, you need a bigger size in order to be chayiv. So that's considered more lenient. So as we go throughout the Mishnah, the bigger sizes, when you need a bigger size, that's considered more lenient, because you're not chayiv until you take out more of it on Shabbos. If you take out a small amount and you're chayiv, that's a chumrah, that's a stringency. So if you Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina is coming to explain that we don't join the shiurim, we don't join the sizes of the different kinds of food to join up to be chayiv, unless you're joining. Unless you're joining one of the things in the Mishnah that the Mishnah gave a smaller size for to something in the Mishnah that the Mishnah gave a bigger size for. So example, if you take out camel food, but it's not enough to fill the camel's mouth, and then you add to it a little bit of cow's food, then you'll be chayiv. That could join to fill up the camel's mouth. You always have to go from the more stringent to the more lenient. And what is stringent and what is lenient in the Mishnah? The bigger size is more lenient, and the smaller size is more stringent. So if you take something which the Mishnah says you only need a little bit of, and you join it with something that the Mishnah said you need more of, then you'd be chayiv. But the other way around, you wouldn't be chayiv.
The combination is a certain shear, is it not?
Yeah, so the combination of camel food, the shear for camel food is to fill a camel's mouth. But if you're missing some of it, right, so you wouldn't be chayiv. But if you fill up the camel's mouth, if you have enough to fill up the whole amount, right, camel's mouth, with a little bit of a different food item, then you'll only be chayiv if that other item is, the way the Mishnah presented, is more chomer, more stringent, a smaller shear, which would be, for example, the cow food. So if you add a little bit of teven, straw, to the eitzo, which is the bean straw, you'll be chayiv.
So the lashon of pater is pater aval aser here, or not, or just or straight pater?
It's probably pater aval aser. I'm assuming. Yeah, every time we say pater in Shabbos, it's pater aval aser, except for a few. Yeah, except for a few exceptions. Okay. Okay. V'chol delay shavu b'shiyurayu mi mitzdarfin. So, since the Mishnah gave us different items with different sizes, and we're saying that they could join if it's in a certain way, right? If you're joining the more stringent to the more lenient, then it could join. The Gemara is bothered by a problem. Anything which is presented as different shiurim, different sizes, different amounts, can they actually join together? V'hotnan, we learned in a Mishnah, in a different place. This Mishnah is later on, and in Sukkah and in Kalim, a few different places. The Mishnah says, Habeged Gimel al Gimel. This Mishnah is in regard to Tumah. So if you have a Zav or a Zava, for example, a man or a woman who becomes Tameh, so there's a Tumah called Tameh Midras, anything that they sit on, which is meant for sitting on, like a cushion, let's say, on a chair. If they sit on that cushion or that mat, the mat that they're sitting on, that material that they're sitting on becomes an Ava Tumah, the highest level of Tumah. It's a special Tumah called Tumah Midras, when somebody who's Tameh sits on it, specifically sitting on it, not just touching it, but sitting on it. So the Mishnah says, Habeged Gimel al Gimel. The minimum size for a cloth, a beged is a cloth, to contract this kind of Tumah, this Tameh of Midras, this seat kind of Tumah, is a minimum of 3 by 3 tfachim. Okay? 3 by 3 handbreadths. The hasak, which is dalet al dalet. Sak is something which is made out of goat here. It's thicker. Rashi explains. So it's 4 by 4. The ha'or is leather, usually like animal hide, skin, is 5 by 5. Hay al hay. Mapets, which is like a mat made of reeds. Vav al vav. That's 6 by 6 tfachim. Okay, V'tani Allah, and the Brisa told us about this Mishnah, taught us about this Mishnah. Habeged v'hasak, if you join the cloth with the sack, which is with the goat hair material, hasak v'ha'ar, each size with the one bigger, each item with the one that the Mishnah presented with a bigger size after it. So hasak v'ha'ar, the sack with the leather, ha'ar v'hamapetz, the leather and the mat, mitzdarfim zeh zeh. They could join one to another. So you have a Mishnah over here. The Mishnah gives us different sizes for each item, and we see in the Brisa that you could join one another to contract Tumah. So if you have, let's say, a piece of cloth which is just shy of 3 by 3, and you add a little bit of the next thing, which is the sack, to it, and it equals 3 by 3, you're going to be chayiv. Okay? Or rather the other way. I'm sorry. I think it only goes the other way. If you add a little bit of the cloth to the sock, it has to go up. So if you don't have the complete 4 by 4, you add a little bit of the cloth, then you're chayiv.
What do you mean by add? Attach it or?
Yeah, attach it. You sew it together. Yeah. Okay, so the beged, the cloth by itself, normally needs 3 by 3, and the sack needs 4 by 4. If you add a little bit of the beged, a little bit of the cloth to that, to the item which needs 4 by 4, you'd be chayiv. That's what the Brisa told us. But Amar Rav Shimon explains, Ma tam, what's the reason? What's the reason why you could join one thing to another over here? Sheru'uyin litame moishav. Because all these items here have something in common, that they can be used as a patch. Rashi explains from another Gemara, that they can be joined in as a patch. If you're patching the saddle of your donkey, of your mule, so then you don't really care what the materials are. You don't care what it's made of. It could even be mixed. And all you need is the size of 1 tefach, even though it's mixed a little bit of this and a little bit of that. So since any one of these items could contract tumah when it's even the size of 1 tefach, therefore they all have something in common. They are mixed together for one common use. In the case where you're patching the saddle, like we explained. So therefore, Rav Shimon explains that's the reason, because they could become tamei when you're sitting on it as a saddle. So that's why specifically over here you can join the different items, even though the Mishnah gave us different sizes for them.
Are the different items just the one up, or any one? In other words, can you
go
join beged, which is the gimel al gimel, to mapets?
Right. So I think when it comes to, I think it's just the one. When it comes to the saddle, it's any. When it comes to the saddle, it's any.
But in the case of the Tumah Midras.
So I think as long as you're going the direction, like you're taking the more chomer one, like we said, to the more kal one, like the one that
is the person sitting on the saddle, it's still sitting.
Yeah. No, but he wants to know in the Mishnah, when the Brisa said we could join one to another, the beged and the sack and the ar, does it have to go specifically one to the next? I think as long as you're going in the direction of beged to sak to or, as long as you're going from the smaller to the bigger. Like we said, the way the Mishnah presented it, the smaller sizes is the more chomer.
So if you attach enough beged to make the mefitz sufficient.
The way I understand it, yes, but again, I'm not 100% sure.
It's a little off topic.
Yeah. Oh, it's right on. Okay. So the Rav Shimon explained that the reason why we could join these items, even though it's something that the Mishnah gave us different sizes about, is because they have a use. They are sometimes joined together for a specific use, and that is a patch. When you make a patch, you don't really care which materials are joined together. So therefore, since they have a use, since sometimes they're combined together, and they could become tameh that way, therefore you could join them together here as well. But the Gemara points out that's only because they have a use together, right? Taima deru'uyim litame moishav. That's only because they can contract tuma when they're connected together, like we explained for a patch. Aval ein roy litame moishav. If you wouldn't have that reason, and we're assuming that our case, our Mishnah, which discusses the different kind of animal fodder, since the Mishnah gives us different sizes, you shouldn't be able to join them because they're never joined together. When are they ever joined? So why should you join them together for carrying on Shabbos to be chayiv? If you wouldn't have this reason, like we had in this Mishnah of Tumah, loy, you wouldn't say that. You wouldn't join them together. Amar Rava says, Hachanami chazia ledugma. Here too, they have a use where there are times when you put all the animal fodder together. What is it? Like Rashi explains, ledugma is somebody who's selling these different items, different kind of straw, grain straw and bean straw and all the different kinds of straws, and he's putting them in the window of his store to show everybody what he's selling. So if you just have a little bit, enough to fit the mouth of a cow, enough to fit the mouth of a camel, it's very light and it can blow away in the wind. They used to display their merchandise outside. But if you put them all together in one pile, it's just showing what they sell in this store. Nobody's going to actually put them together and feed it to an animal. You'll go inside the store and take which one you need, but the merchant, the store owner, puts them all together to display what he sells. He's displaying that he sells straw. So therefore, since they have a time, there is a use where they're put all together, so you can join them too to be chayiv on Shabbos, even though the Mishnah gave them different sizes,
so as far as
different
the
shira.
no one's going to give their animal all these types of food together. It's
Correct.
like the dugma.
Right. Dugma is enough. Obviously, the Gemara felt that
Not regal.
dugma is enough of a use where you put them together. Since they're put together for something, so for Shabbos we could put them together too. The rule where we say we never join something which the Mishnah gives us different sizes about, that's only if the sizes are never combined. If the Mishnah gives us this size is specifically for this and this size is specifically for this. But if you do join them together sometimes, like we had by the Tumah, where you could put for a patch, you mix the two materials, so then you could join them together to be chayiv on Shabbos. Okay, next Mishnah. What time does the shir usually go to?
Until we get to the bottom.
Okay.
The latest.
Okay. We'll get there.
5 after Mark.
Let's see the Mishnah. Hamaitzi eichlim kegregeres chayiv. If somebody, now we're talking about eichlim. Eichlim is food for human consumption. This is food for people. So if somebody carries out food on Shabbos, kigregeres, the amount which equals the size of a dried fig, chayiv. He's chayiv, he's liable for carrying on Shabbos. Because if it has a normal use, people usually take that amount out. People use that amount for eating. Umitztarfim zemzeh. The difference here is food, it could be combined. Why? Because all mipnei sheshavu b'shiyurehen. Because all food has the same size when it comes to Shabbos. All food is measured like a gregeres in order to be chayiv, like a fig, in order to be chayiv for Shabbos. Different than the animal fodder, which has different sizes for different animals. Different kinds of feed have different sizes. Here, it's all the same. But the Mishnah points out that we don't measure it with everything. You don't measure the food with its shell, chutz mikli pasan. You don't measure it with its outer shell, v'garinehen. You don't measure it with its seeds inside, v'uktzehen. You don't measure it with its uketz. The uketz is the stem. It's just like a piece of wood, so you don't measure it with that. V'suban is bran. This is like the way Rashi explains this. It's the shell which goes around the kernel. Mursanan. Mursanan is when you sift the flour, when you sift it to make fine flour, it sifts out this mursanan, which is even a thinner bran that's around the kernel. So this would be like whole wheat would include these things, but fine white flour, sifted flour, wouldn't include these things. So these things, the Mishnah says, even these bran are not included in measuring the food for carrying on Shabbos. So it has to measure to the size of a fig without the shell, seeds, the stem, and the coarse and fine bran. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, chutz miklipe adoshin shemizbash lois imohen. It's except for the peel of lentils that you do, because you do cook the lentils with these peels, with this shell. So therefore, you do measure the lentils. Rabbi Yehuda says, all other food you don't measure with the shells, but the ones of the peel or the shell of the lentils, you do measure it with it because you cook it with them. So it becomes part of the food. You end up eating it. So let's see the Gemara. V'suban umorsanon loy mitzdarfen. V'suban umorsanon loy mitzdarfen. The bran, the stuff that you sift out, the suban is explained as it gets removed when you bang, when you hit the kernel to get it out. So those two things, that and the morsanon, which is the finer shell, loy mitzdarfen, they don't join to measure to the size of the fig for food. V'hatnan, didn't we not learn in the Mishnah, chameshes revoyim kemach, when it comes to the halacha of flour, the halacha of challah, when somebody bakes challah, they have to take off an amount of challah, a small amount of challah, and this only applies, this halacha of challah only applies if you have a minimum size of batter, of dough. And what is that size? It's 5 and a little bit quarters, chameshes revoim kemach. It is, let's just see Rashi for a second, what exactly the size is. Doesn't say. It's 5 quarters of flour, quarter of a kav, I think it is, or a quarter of a
5 quarters of a cup.
Yeah, a quarter of a lug. I think it says it.
Cup. It says near crust.
Oh, Steinzel says a quarter of a kav. A quarter of
a cup.
Okay. Here is a machlekes between Art Scroll and Steinsaltz. He says quarter of a kav. He says quarter of a lug. I think quarter of a kav is the correct way. V'oid chayavin b'chala kemach v'oid chameshes revoim kemach v'oid. It's 5 quarters and a little bit. Only then are you chayiv in challah. Only if you have that minimum size are you chayiv to take off challah. So you measure. How do you measure the quarter of the kav? It's hein v'suban umorsanon. You measure it together with the shell, with the bran, with the coarse and fine bran. Amar Abaya shekain. What's the reason for this? Shekain ani eichel pitoi beisa belusa. Because a pauper and a poor person eats his flour with these things in it, not fine flour. He eats whole wheat. So for any of us that eat whole wheat, the Gemara considers us an ani. Today it's more common.
A healthy ani.
Yeah, a healthy ani, right. Okay, so the Mishnah says you don't measure it together. The Gemara is bothered. Why does it say by challah you do measure it together? You measure it with this suban and morsanon, the coarse and fine bran. The reason is because an ani eats it together, eats these brans together with his flour. He keeps it in. So it's considered food with regard to challah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer chutz b'klipe adashim hamizbash lois imohen. The next part of the Mishnah said that Rabbi Yehuda said that the shells of lentils, you measure it with them for this to reach your grogeris, to reach your size of your fig. Why? Because they're cooked together with it and they're eaten together. The shell of a lentil is cooked together with the lentils. The Gemara says that it implies adashim in, lentils yes, poilin loy, but beans no. V'hatanya, but we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Omer chutz b'klipe poilin v'adashim. We have somewhere else another brisa which says that Rabbi Yehuda says that you count in the shells of beans and lentils. So the Gemara answers loikasha habachadati habatiki. One is talking about by new, one is talking about by old. When you have new beans, then you include the shells in when they're fresh. But atiki, when they're old, you don't include them, you don't measure them together because you don't cook them together with the beans. My time alloy, what's the reason why you don't? Amar Rabavahu, Rabavahu says, it looks like flies on the plate. Because they're black, they look like flies. Rashi says, since they're black, they look like flies, and when it gets old, you don't include it anymore. So that's the difference, that's the discrepancy between our Mishnah, which just says adashim, lentils, and this other brisa, which says beans and lentils. The difference is, the brisa is talking about new beans, and the Mishnah is talking about old beans, which don't include them. Okay, Hadron Alach Klal Gadol. We'll return to the parak of Klal Gadol to review, or to learn it again, soon. Yeah, or you could do it sooner. Hamaitzi Yayin, the Mishnah says, Hamaitzi Yayin, we're still on the same topic of carrying, transferring different food items, or different items on Shabbos. So, how much do you have to transfer? How much do you have to carry out in order to be chayav, to be held responsible on Shabbos? Hamaitzi Yayin, if somebody carries out wine, the kind of wine we're talking over here, Rashi says Yayin Chai. Chai means undiluted wine. We don't drink undiluted wine. It's very heavy and very strong. But the proper way to make wine is to dilute it with a certain amount of water, which we'll soon see in the Gemara how much that is. If you take out enough undiluted wine, the amount which is enough to create a diluted cup of wine, a cup, we'll see what kind of cup we're talking about in the Gemara also, or chalav, milk, kedei gemia, enough milk for one swallow, devash, honey, kedei litein al hakasis, enough to put onto a blister. And Rashi says we're talking about a blister on the back of horses and camels, because they used to carry the load, and the load used to cause an irritation on their skin. So you take out enough honey to rub on this blister, you'll be chayiv on Shabbos. But Rashi also says from his teachers, Rabbi Sai Pirshu, kasis is maka she'al gabi hayad she'al gav haregel, a blister which forms on a human, on the back of your hand or your leg. I think he's talking about a human. So there's two understandings of what the use of the honey is, but it's I guess the same amount. If you take out a small amount of honey to put onto a blister, you'd be chayiv. Shemen, if you take out enough oil, kedei lasuch aver katan, in order to smear onto a small limb on your body, which the Gemara will explain. Rashi says the Gemara will explain what we're talking about. Mayim, if you take out enough water, kedei lashuf bahem es hakilor, enough to mix in together with this kind of medicine that they put on the eye, on an eye patch, but you needed to put a small amount of water with it. If you take out that amount of water, v'shar kol hamashkin, and any other liquids, any other kind of drinks rather, b'revius. All other kind of drinks that you take out on Shabbos, you need the amount of a revius, which is a lot, or more, at least more than the amounts that we previously stated in the Mishnah. The first few, by wine, honey, oil, and water, it's a very small amount, or a smaller amount. And by any other drinks, you have to take out at least a revius. A revius is a quarter of a kav, a quarter of a lug. And in practical, today we would measure it. It's a dispute amongst the Paiskim. It ranges from approximately 3 ounces to 5.5 ounces approximately, so let's take an average of 4 ounces. That would be a revius. So any other drink, you need to have at least a couple of ounces in order to be chayav for taking it out on Shabbos. V'chol ha'shayfchim, any kind of drink that you just pour out, which the Gemara will explain what this is. In other words, it's not drinkable, it's just for pouring out. The revius. As well, you need to have a revius, a couple of ounces. Reb Shimon Omer, kulon b'revius, all of the above mentioned, even wine, honey, and oil and water, you need to have a revius. Similar to the Mishnah on Ayin Hey Amud Beis, Rav Shimon says that the reason why we gave these small shiurim for wine, honey, oil, and water is only for people that actually store those small amounts. They have a special liking for those items, or they have a specific reason why they use such a small amount. But normally, for a regular person that doesn't have a use for those small amounts, they need to bring out a revius. That's Rav Shimon. So the Tanna Kama says these wine, honey, oil, and water, these specific small amounts for the uses that the Mishnah mentions. And Rav Shimon says, no, everything with the revius, unless you're somebody who specifically stores these very small amounts for specific uses. Okay. Says the Gemara. Tana, we were taught in a brisa, kedei mezigas kais yafe. What's this cup of wine that we're talking about? You need to have enough undiluted wine. In order to be chayav for carrying on Shabbos, you have to carry out enough undiluted wine to create a cup of diluted wine. What kind of cup are we talking about? A kais yafe, a nice cup. What's a nice cup? Umay kais yafe, kais shel bracha. It's talking about the cup of wine you use when you say Birchas Hamazon, the benching. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avuha. Rav Nachman says in the name of Rabba bar Avuha, Kais shel bracha tzarich sheyehei boy. The kais of bracha, the kais of benching, the kais of Birchas Hamazon has to have sheyehei boy roiva revius. It has to have a quarter of a revius of undiluted wine. Kedei, in order sheyimzegenu v'yamod al harevius. So this cup of wine that we're talking about, a cup of undiluted wine that we're talking about in the Mishnah, has to have a quarter of a revius. So the finished product after you dilute it has to be a revius. And so we're being told now that the way you dilute a cup of wine is you have 1 part of undiluted wine and 3 parts of water, and that gives you your cup of revius, your revius of wine. Amar Rava, and Rava says, Rava wants to bring a proof to this, that wine is diluted by 1 part to 3 parts from our Mishnah. Prove it from our Mishnah. Afanan nami tanina. We learned in our Mishnah, which says, I'll just go till the end of this idea. Hamaitzi yayin. If somebody carries out wine on Shabbos, this is our Mishnah, kedei mezigas kais, enough to dilute a cup of wine. V'tani Allah, and we were taught on this in the brisa which we just mentioned. Kedei mezigas kais yafa. We're talking about diluting a nice cup of wine, which is the kais shel bracha, right? And then going back to the Mishnah, another factor here. V'katani seifa. We learned in the seif in the end of the Mishnah. V'shar kol hamashkin, all other drinks b'revius. You need to have a revius, enough to drink a revius, which we said is a couple of ounces, a revius of a lug. So it must be that if the finished product has to be enough to drink, which is a revius, so when we said you're chayiv on carrying out enough wine, enough undiluted wine, it must be that it's talking about 1/4 of the amount of the finished revius after it's diluted. That's Rava's proof from our Mishnah. The Rava Latamei, the Gemara points out that Rava is going in accordance with another teaching of Rava, which the Gemara brings here from Baba Basra and Erevin. The Gemara says, "De Amar Rava, Kol Chamra Deloy Dari Al Chad Tlas Maya." Any wine which is not made of 1 part wine and 3 parts water, Lav Chamrahu. It's not considered wine. It's bad wine. Okay, so we see that Rava goes in accordance with his own teaching in another place that it's 1 to 3. Amar Abaya comes to challenge the proof of Rava, and the fact that Rava says in a different place that it's 1 to 3. Amar Abaya, shtei tshuvos bedavar. I have 2 responses in this matter. Chada, the first one is the Tanan, because we learned in the Mishnah, v'hamazuk shnei chelkei mayim ve'echad yayin. Okay, min hayayin hashirayni. We have a Mishnah or a Mishnah in Nida, which tells us that it's 2 parts water to 1 part wine, and we're talking about a wine called shirayni wine. It comes from the region of Sharon or Shiron. Okay, the Mishnah says it's 2 to 1, so that's 1 place where you're wrong, Rava. V'oid, and furthermore, mayim bekadu mitzdarfin. What do you mean that you're chayiv for taking out a small amount of undiluted wine? We're chayiv on Shabbos. You can't drink that small amount, right? So what are you talking about? You're talking about bringing out undiluted wine, and you're measuring it by the size that you're going to end up drinking it once it's diluted. Abaya asks Rava, but you still didn't dilute it. At the time that you're carrying out, this is the way Rashi explains it, that when you're carrying out the undiluted wine, the water's not here. You don't have the water. The water's still sitting in the pitcher somewhere. That's right, or wherever it is, but it's not here. That's the words that he uses, mayim bekad. The mayim is still in the jug, or it's still in the pitcher. So how could you say that you're chayiv to bring out the undiluted wine, the amount that after you dilute it, it's going to reach the revius? Right now, it's not diluted.
Isn't that what the Mishnah said?
The Mishnah did say that, but Abaya doesn't like Rava's understanding of it.
Maybe it's choshev enough. That's undiluted wine.
That's very good. That's what Rava's going to say. That's what Rava's response back to Abaye is going to be. But right now, Abaye is bothered that since you can't say that the Mishnah didn't specify how much it is, right? All the Mishnah said was amount of undiluted wine, what the amount to create a diluted cup of wine. Rava says he measures it by the way you normally dilute wine, 3 parts water to 1 part wine. Abaye says you don't have the water, so how could you say that that's how we measure it? Abaye has a different way of understanding it, obviously. So Amar Le Rava, let's just finish a few more lines here. Amar Le Rava, Rava says back to Abaye, Amrit, on this that you said Shnei Chelkei Mayim ve'echad Yayin, this that you told me, that you brought me a Mishnah from Nida that says 2 parts wine to 1 part, 2 parts water to 1 part wine. Min hayayin hashiraini, from that kind of wine. Yayin hashiraini, the yayin from Shirain, lechud, that's specifically talking about that kind of wine that you have 2 to 1. And instead of 3 to 1. Why? Derafi, it's a weak wine. The wine that comes out of that region is a weak wine. So you need to have a smaller amount of water. Inami, or hasa mishum chazusa. We're talking about the look of it. The Mishnah over there in Nida is talking about the colors of dam, the colors of blood. And one way to identify the color the Mishnah brings is similar to the color of Shirain wine, this kind of wine, when it's diluted 2 to 1. That is the same. It has the same redness of the blood. But so Rava says that's talking about how the wine should look. Avolotaima, but for the taste of the wine, you still need BAYT. You're going to need 3 to 1. So Abaye challenged Rava and said the Mishnah says you only need 2 to 1, not 3 to 1. Rava has 2 responses. One is that's only that specific kind of wine because it's a weak wine, and the second one is when the Mishnah says 2 to 1 instead of 3 to 1, that's only to create the look like dam, like blood. But to create the proper taste of wine, you'll still need to have 3 to 1. Udika Amrit, and that which you said, Mayim Bakad, you challenged me and you said, Mayim Bakad, the water's still in the jug, so you can't say that that's the amount that you need to carry out for Shabbos to be chayiv. Umitztarfin l'inyan Shabbos, the Udika Amrit, Mayim Bakad, umitztarfin l'inyan Shabbos. You questioned me and you said, Mayim Bakad, the water's still in the jug, umitztarfin l'inyan Shabbos, and it should join with regard to being chayiv on Shabbos. So Rava says, like you said over here, midi de chashiv be'inan, something which is chashiv, v'hanami chashiv, something which is, since this quarter of a revius of undiluted wine is significant, it's a chashiv amount because you're going to make wine out of it. It has its own chashivas. Even before it's diluted, it's considered chashiv to be chayiv, to be held responsible for carrying this amount out on Shabbos. So Rava holds to his reasoning like he explained. Okay, we'll stop here.
Yeah.